Hey everyone, I'm Shreyas and I'm here with Anusha. And today we are going to be talking about Molnupiravir. So Molnupiravir is a COVID-19 treatment pill that was researched and actually discovered at Emory University, where we're from, and it's being manufactured and distributed by Merck, the pharmaceutical company. And we just wanted to talk about it, especially in light of the FDA's recent approval. If I'm not mistaken, it was an emergency use
Mhm.
approval. Um, and we just wanted to provide some like key takeaways from the discovery per se and the approval and just how the pill is doing globally. So in terms of the FDA approval, it was very narrow. It was, if I'm not mistaken, 13 to 10.
Yeah.
And that was mainly because, yeah, it's an effective treatment for individuals who have mild, moderate symptoms to prevent them from developing more severe symptoms. But it has a much lower efficacy rate compared to treatment options that include technologies like antibodies and
Mhm.
harnessing antibodies and things like that. And though the UK approved Molnupiravir a while ago, some countries like France have stopped their or canceled their order for Molnupiravir recently. So we just figured it's an important topic to talk about. I'm not sure
Yeah,
if you had anything.
absolutely. I think that there's definitely some concerns. Like, I believe in the trial research, they were talking about how they had seen like side effects like diarrhea, nausea, and dizziness. And one of the more important ones that researchers were thinking that it could affect those under 18 in regard to their bone and cartilage growth. And obviously, we don't want people having bone damage and cartilage damage because of an emergency use pill. So right now, it seems like the pill is going to be staying as like a prescription only drug, and it seems like they're not going to authorize it for use for anybody underneath the age of 18 and not for any pregnant women because of any of the potential side effects whatsoever. I think that's actually pretty interesting, the history of it though, Shreyas. I know that you mentioned that like Emory researchers were the one who came up with it, but it's pretty interesting because the team that came up with it, otherwise known as like the Drug Innovation Ventures, drive for short, they actually began this work in 2013, which is pretty cool. They were trying to test against like other coronaviruses, like with animal testing, like SARS and like MERS, which is the Middle East Respiratory Syndrome. And then when the pandemic came up, they began working with like researchers at like Vanderbilt and like Georgia State and like a bunch of other universities to kind of like figure out if they could do more testing for this specific like strain of coronavirus, and it seemed like it was successful. They eventually licensed it to Merck, which is why it's referred to as the Merck pill rather than like the Emory or Drive pill, because this is the company that actually like really pushed into overdrive in regard to manufacturing.
Yeah, and it's very interesting that you mentioned that because it kind of reminds me of the COVID vaccine in the sense of how quickly it was developed because the technology, one of the technologies for it, the mRNA technology was, I guess, discovered a while ago and kept being like toyed around with for years.
Mm-hmm.
And this was one of the first like massive like applications of it. So I think it
Absolutely.
just goes to say that like two things. I would say one, that even though you may think that certain research is like extremely specific and just might be for the purpose of like publishing more like articles or things like that, which I mean that might be the case sometimes, but um the technology can be used in very unforeseen ways in the future, which is sort of what's happening here. But it also just goes to show that you don't really need to be concerned necessarily about the rate of development for the vaccine or the pill because they really have been developing these technologies for years
Yeah.
now. I think you said 2013 for this pill. It just was not being used specifically in the sense of a COVID like treatment pill, but that technology was being worked on. Also, because I mentioned the vaccine, I do want to mention or reiterate per se, this pill is not a vaccine like replacement or something like
Yeah.
that. It's more of a treatment pill if you do test positive and you end up having like mild, moderate symptoms. And especially this pill is used if you are at risk of developing more severe symptoms based on underlying conditions or just the way your symptoms are presenting and things like that. And there are other treatment options available now notably the one with antibodies. However, yes, this is not a vaccine or a vaccine replacement.
Yeah, it's worth mentioning, like you said, that like it's not authorized for any like prevention of COVID-19 or any like initiation of treatment in patients that are hospitalized, simply because the researchers haven't yet observed any like benefit of the treatment. And so they're not going to like say that like you should be taking it as this kind of like effective treatment, like or prevention measure. But in regard to just research in general, I like to think of research is a really big puzzle piece or like a puzzle game. Like a lot of the individual pieces, you're gonna kind of look at them and be like, why are you doing this, or why are you like spending all this time focusing on this innate and very specific portion of like this particular field, this particular like science. But when you put it all together, it really comes together and gives you a great picture of like the kind of technology that we need. And every single scientist who contributed to the mRNA technology and in subsequent like inventions and reinventions of the technology were just as important as the initial founder, the initial person who put it all together and created the vaccine, in this case, for example, like Pfizer. I think it is also worth mentioning that people are definitely like worried about like the development process. Like it's kind of like, how can this have like happened so quickly when in the past we've been told that science takes a long time? Well, for one thing, the scientists aren't compromising any safety measures. It's simply that more money is being poured in and more just time is being given to these scientists, and now they're being placed in a timeline or like a timetable, and they're getting more power from like the government to continue this research at an amped up scale, all the while not compromising safety. Like a lot of science is hampered down, unfortunately, by bureaucratic processes, but the bureaucratic processes that are not being compromised here are the safety measures. I think that's worth mentioning, because when people hear that the government is taking the red tape off of like vaccine development, I think it's safety, but no, it's just that sometimes the grants need to be this, and as the bureaucracy makes it slow to get to these grants, and like the research and all of these things have kind of been amped up because COVID is such an important pandemic that's come around now.
Yeah, it's more time, more like education towards it, but it's also just more people in the sense of, for example, I was reading an article that Emory University was sending to us about how the Emory researcher who, or their lab who's responsible for sort of discovering this pill per se, they initially were developing this sort of medication for reasons completely unrelated to COVID, like
Mm-hmm.
prior to
Yeah.
the outbreak of COVID. But once we were learning more about COVID, the lab sort of realized, hey, we can possibly harness this aspect of the drug to attack per se this part of the virus in order to appease symptoms and things like that. So that it just goes to show that there isn't, any safety minimizing or anything like that. It's really just various different types of people who may have been focusing on different things have now just come together in a way and are trying to focus together on COVID because, again, how of the grand scale of it. Did you have
Yeah.
any other thoughts, Anusha, on
The pill in
Molnupiravir?
general.
Yeah.
I think that honestly, the best kind of just last thoughts I have on it is that Emery has called this drug the little pill that could. And I feel like that's just like a great little example of like anything that's been created or invented in the pandemic. We've seen like a huge just kind of scientific boom because there was a need for it and innovation spurred it on. But also I think that quote just kind of shows like how powerful science can be. I feel like we kind of sometimes take for granted certain things that in our lives that we didn't have like 20, 30, 50, or even a century or two ago. And it really goes to show how quickly science has evolved. And like you said, when people really work hard on something and like you have a lot of people and a lot of resources and a lot of time, you can get a lot of things done. And it's entirely possible to get it done. It's just a matter of, do we want it to get done, and how important is that priority of getting it done?
Exactly. And because pill policy is a health policy organization, I would I would have to mention that yay, we did discover this pill and we now have it, but obviously legislation is very important to make sure this pill is actually at hospitals and it's actually going
Absolutely.
into the patients that need it. Again, individuals that have mild to moderate symptoms that are at risk of developing more severe symptoms are the ones who are taking this. This isn't a vaccine. But yes, so legislation is important, and those are probably the next big steps that hopefully our government is taking care of or is already taking care of. But
Yeah,
that, yeah,
absolutely.
that's all we have for today. And yeah, look out for another episode of The Political Patient.
Bye, guys.